BloodStream Journeys is produced by BloodStream Media and made possible exclusively by BioMarin. I'm Heather Robb, and this is Journeys, a monthly podcast from BloodStream Media. Typically, we feature the stories of 3 individuals within the bleeding disorders community, but we've got something very special for you this month. Nicole Angeles might be a name some of you recognize. She's been a contributor here before and has been very open with her VWD journey, particularly as it related to becoming a mother. So what we're going to do today is take a deep dive into Nicole's story, hearing from her at 3 extremely pivotal points along the way. It's one woman's journey that contains lessons for all of us about persistence, advocacy, and courage. And no spoilers, but you'll definitely want to stick around for her most recent update. So, without further ado, here's Nicole Angeles, Chapter 1. VWD and me. When I was 16 years old, I was diagnosed with von Willebrand disease. It was Valentine's Day, and I was walking to work when a huge blood clot came out of my genital area, almost as if I had given birth in the middle of the street. I remember being extremely confused. I usually had painful menstrual cramps, but I had never experienced anything like this. Bystanders were concerned and wanted to call an ambulance, but I was right by my job, so I went to work and cleaned myself up. Then I called my mother and told her what had happened. Funnily enough, it felt important to assure her that I was still a virgin. She was very worried and arranged an emergency visit to my pediatric doctor. This kind of bleeding did not run in our family, so my mother really did not understand what was going on. We were anxious for an explanation. My doctor set me up for a bunch of blood work and a special blood panel. When the results came back, she had another doctor with her who explained that I had von Willebrand disease, type 1, and would need to be treated by a special hematologist to learn how to deal with this disorder. Of course, I was scared. I started to think about my life prior to that day. I got my period when I was 11 years old, and every month during my menstrual cycle, I was sent home from school crying in pain. I always had frequent nosebleeds and mouth bleeds and was regularly passing out in school. The signs were all there, but no one considered that I might have a bleeding disorder. We had never questioned to anyone about my difficulties. When I was told that I had VWD, they said that it was a rare genetic Hispanic disorder. I now know that statement was very untrue. Once I found a good hematologist and everyone was aware of my disorder, life became a little bit easier, but there was still a long journey ahead. I'm now 25 and have had both nostrils cauterized to control my nosebleeds, but my menstrual cycle continues to be the most challenging part of my blood disorder. I bleed to the point that I have to wear diapers and often avoid leaving the house. It's been incredibly difficult to find a solution. I have seen multiple hematologists, regular and high-risk GYNs, and no one has been able to help. I've been on oral contraceptives and tried an IUD, that didn't go well, but nothing lessens the pain or severity. I even went off my contraceptives because they didn't seem to be helping, but that put me in an ambulance, screaming for help like I was in labor. Finally, my doctor presented me with a very difficult choice. I either needed to get pregnant or I should consider a hysterectomy. He said if I didn't make a decision within a year and a half, I might lose the opportunity of having a child. At the time, I was, and still am, engaged, but my fiancé and I were in a rough patch. It was incredibly difficult to start talking about having a child when we were still figuring out our relationship. I saw a fertility doctor who had worked with many women with VWD, and he told me I could have a pregnancy without complications if I followed his 6 steps. When I told this to my fiancé, he didn't respond well. He was scared, unsure, and shocked all at the same time. He couldn't understand why pregnancy was the only solution and wanted me to see more doctors, get more opinions. But I was tired of doctors, and I felt ready to have a child. I fell into a depression, feeling alone and helpless. I started to wonder whether to end the engagement, not only for myself, but for my fiancé as well. That's when I started to look for help in different ways. I started to connect with the New York City Hemophilia chapter and got more information on pregnancy and hysterectomies. I got a better understanding of why pregnancy was the best option, and I did my best to communicate that to my fiancé. Finally, he understood the situation, and we are now working towards having a child. Being faced with these 2 options was harder on me and my relationship than I ever could have imagined. Ultimately, I had to listen to myself and gain a greater understanding so that I could communicate clearly with my fiancé and get on the same page. There's a lot to learn from outside sources, but now I trust myself above all others because no one knows my pain, my bleeding, or my current situation better than I do. What a choice to be faced with, hysterectomy or pregnancy. And what a complicated conversation to have with your fiancé. How fortunate that Nicole was able to connect with her local chapter during that time and finally get the information and support she needed. That sense of empowerment leads us into the next part of Nicole's journey, Chapter 2.
Everyone may remember me from my last piece discussing my struggles living with von Willebrand disease as a woman. It's been some time and I have much to discuss as a follow-up. I always want to make sure, when I am sharing a piece of my life, I am as informative as possible with a touch of enlightenment. There has been many changes since I last shared my story. It's only right that I tell you about the beauty and challenges of my journey. Since my last story, I'm now pregnant. I last discussed that I was given two choices, hysterectomy or have a baby. Instead of rushing to get pregnant, I decided to follow up with a new hematologist at an HTC in New York City. After much discussion and many blood draws, I was finally able to control my heavy menstrual cycles with frequent infusions. This gave me the ability to have a baby on my own terms instead of being forced. It also helped me with my relationship, being that my husband also did not feel forced to have a child when he was not ready. However, since getting pregnant, I have hit a few bumps in the road. In early February, I contracted a strand of the coronavirus after being exposed at work. At the time, I was about 10 weeks pregnant. This was before the coronavirus had fully hit the US and before a global pandemic had been declared. I was sent home and quarantined until my symptoms resolved. Thankfully, my symptoms did resolve and I was able to return to work. However, about 3 weeks later, I contracted RSV, which is a respiratory syncytial virus. I was still very early in my pregnancy, but I also do have asthma, so my breathing was compromised and I was hospitalized. By that time, we were in the middle of the pandemic, so after the hospitalization, I was sent home and told not to return to work until after I give birth due to having a high-risk pregnancy. All of this was very scary for me, of course. However, I'm glad that I recovered and I'm home safely. Throughout the pregnancy, of course, I also experienced different types of bleeds. Years before I became pregnant, I was advised by several physicians that once I did get pregnant, the bleeding would be under control. To my surprise, they were completely wrong. When I was working, I had noticed a hematoma to my left lower leg. It was so bad that I could not walk. I went to the hospital, but they could offer no explanation. I had also noticed multiple bruises throughout my body. I decided to reach out to both my HTC and my OB doctor. They both decided that infusing once a week, every week, was the safest thing for me to do. Since I was planning to give birth in a different county from my HTC, my OB doctor advised me to see the hematologist at the hospital. Unfortunately, I have seen this hematology team before, and we did not leave on a good note. Their lack of knowledge of VWD caused me to leave their practice. My OB reached out to one of the doctors personally via email to explain the situation. So the team was aware I was coming in to discuss a birthing plan. However, as soon as the doctor came into the room, the appointment went completely south. The first thing he said to me was, "I'm confused why you're here." Right away, my face was puzzled. I said to him, "Well, I'm pregnant and I have VWD. I'm here to discuss that." He replied, "Well, don't you go to the city for your care?" I said, "Yes. However, I live here in Suffolk County, so I would be giving birth here, and that would mean we would need you on board." He had an issue with that I was being seen in the city by another hematologist, and since we did not have a good past, it would not have made sense for them to take care of me. It seemed like he was turning me away. However, at the end of the appointment, he said when I got to 28 weeks, he would have to see me every week until I give birth. I left that appointment completely confused and in tears. I immediately called my HTC and my OB to tell them I was afraid to give birth without the proper care team. When my OB heard about the details of my upsetting appointment, he reached out to the doctor to let him know we no longer needed his services. This pregnancy has had so many ups and downs so far, and some very scary moments. But the most important thing to me is a safe delivery during this pandemic. I know that I must fight for what I know is to be right for the safety of both me and my daughter. Being pregnant during this pandemic and having a blood disorder has been very challenging and very scary. I have a lot of time on my hands, which is preparing me for my birth, meaning making sure that I have enough fusions for myself, for the delivery, and that my daughter has everything she needs when she arrives. It is important to see the positivity during the negative time in history. And although there is a global pandemic, I cannot forget that I have a bleeding disorder and that I'm pregnant and my safety comes first no matter anyone's opinion. I'm nervous to give birth not only because of the coronavirus, but also because of the bleeding that I will have to go through. Thankfully, I have an amazing HTC to guide me through my bleeding and my OB who has knowledge of bleeding disorders and pregnancy. I hope my stories can empower other women to advocate for themselves when they hit a roadblock. As you know, I have hit a few roadblocks, but I have come out of them smiling, happier, healthier, and more knowledgeable about my care. I'm due anytime during the summer, and I promise to follow up with an amazing story of how a woman with VWD had a successful and eventful birth.
Can you imagine piling COVID on top of an already complicated birth? What an eventful year for all of us, of course. So I knew we needed a follow-up. Well, I certainly needed a follow-up because I feel lucky to have gotten to the point where I think of Nicole as a friend, even though we've never met. So as I've been doing with a number of dear friends this year, maybe you have too, Nicole and I made a plan to get on the phone and do a nice long catch-up sesh. She agreed that we could record the call, so here it is. Buckle up for the final chapter, Chapter 3.
So I went in on July 28th for my planned C-section. I went in to the hospital, and the first thing the nurse said, because I got there at 8 o'clock in the morning, was, "What are you doing here? We usually do C-sections in the afternoon." And I said, "Well, Dr. Gary told me to come in earlier because I'm going to need a PICC line and some infusions and transfusions." So when I had seen him about 3 days prior or so, I watched him text the nurse and the team that I was coming in earlier than expected. So I knew that it was already, somebody should have known that I was there. So once I told her that, she stepped out, got the information she needed, and the ball started to roll from there by 11:30. We got the medication in. I started to do my infusion. And then I did get a PICC line, well, a midline. I got a midline. And once I got the midline, got the infusion, the ball started to roll. So I started the induction process. So I was not open a lot. I was open about 0.5 centimeters. So they started to open me up down there. They placed like a tampon-like device inside my uterus to start the whole process. It was supposed to stay in me for 12 hours, and the next day I should have been at least a little bit open. But the first one that was implanted ended up falling out within 20 minutes, and we thought it was in there the whole time, so I had to get another one. The other one didn't even do anything to me. So I was having contractions, but they were not huge, so I was very comfortable. So once they realized that failed, they came in and talked to me and said that they were going to start inserting catheters and Foleys inside of me to begin the process of opening me up. And then once that was all finished, they were going to start the Pitocin. So once they talked to me the next day about the process, that's when things started to roll. It was the 29th, and all teams were ready, meaning GYN, OB, hematology, and obviously the labor and delivery nurses. Before we went into the labor and delivery room, because we were in antepartum first, hematology came. However, they did not come inside my room. They did not speak to me. They did not address me whatsoever, but they knew I was there because they had to, because they had a bleeding disorder patient giving birth in their hospital. So we do have a past history where we never got along. They were very disrespectful, very nasty to me, even when I was sent to them in the middle of my pregnancy, which I had mentioned in my previous story. So I already did not want to deal with them. I had already done my infusion that was already given to me by my HCC, the set dose. Hematology came in front of my door, told my nurse to infuse another 800 units of my factor. So when my nurse came in and just told me to do that, I looked at her and I said, what are you talking about? I already did my infusion. And she said, no, hematology is saying to do another 800. And I said, well, who's hematology? That's not my doctor. That's not the doctor that prescribed my medication for this delivery. I'm not doing it. And why did they not come in here and talk to me and address me? Why is there no communication? The nurse, I tried to be very nice to her because it's not like she knew of any of this. So she went back out, explained the situation to them. While she was doing that, I called my pharmacy that does the medication, Takeda, and I spoke to two separate nurses. They both said as well that they should not have done that and to contact my HCC because someone needs to be involved in regards to the extra dose, and that they had not heard of another dose being administered in the middle of the dose still being active within my body. It had not even been 2 hours that I had done the medication, and the half-life of that medication is 19 hours. So that's why I was confused and concerned. I did not want to overdose pretty much on my body, especially with me going through labor. So instead of hematology coming in, the OB team came in, her attending and her boss. And they came in and explained to me what hematology had explained to them about what the extra 800 units would do for me. And it was basically something called a quote-unquote loading dose. It was more so for the safety. So once I had addressed that with my HCC, I said, okay, fine, we'll do that as long as it's 800 and everybody knows what's going on and I'm in the hospital. If the worst case scenario happens, I'm in the right place. I did that. Once I did the 800 units, we went on to labor and delivery, and that's when things really started to go. So they placed a balloon inside of my uterus to really open me up. The plan was to have a natural birth at first. When they placed the balloon, it stood in for 12 hours, and after it was in my uterus for 12 hours, I opened up to about 4.5 centimeters, which was great. But that whole time, I was completely calm. I felt nothing. They kept asking me, how are you feeling? How are you doing? You're definitely contracting. And I was like, I'm fine. So once my balloon was over, they said, now we're going to break your water. So I said, all right, cool, no problem. I thought it was going to hurt. So I was scared and I wanted to get the pain medication already, but they said, no, this does not hurt whatsoever. And they were right. It did not hurt. They did break my water, and that's when my bleeding started, like right off the back. During this whole time, I am infusing, so I'm completely safe. Now they start the Pitocin. Now, Pitocin goes up to about 16 on the machine in regards to strength. I made it to 12, and it was horrible. Worst thing I think I've ever felt as far as pain. I was screaming. There was nothing I could do to feel comfortable. So what they had done was start me on a fentanyl pump. So what that means, I was on a continuous pump of fentanyl. So while the Pitocin was going, I was getting fentanyl for the pain. But I also had a push button to push every time there was a contraction. And I did that. But no one told me that there was a limit on how many times I can push the button, how much fentanyl I can get within the hour. And I was just pushing and pushing because the pain was so surreal. We had several conversations about not getting an epidural because, one, it was not something I wanted. That was definitely a conversation my fiance and I had where there was not going to be an epidural. One, because of the risk over the benefit. The risk of bleeding into my spine was something that I was not ready to deal with. So I really wanted to not get it anyhow. However, they did explain to us if we really did want the epidural, what would come with that, the risks of going in or getting a cesarean in case that we needed it with an epidural, how that would be pretty much life-threatening for me. So we definitely did not want that. So I had to go through the medication of IV pain medication. Now, prior to all of this, just to kind of put a cover on this part of the story, I had seen a anesthesiologist and we had talked about pain management. And she had told me all my options in regards to pain management for delivering natural. So I knew what my options were. So when we started the fentanyl, because they had to get the fentanyl, there was a whole process. The first thing that they gave me was Dilaudid, but a small dose of Dilaudid to kind of get me going. Then they started the fentanyl. But again, once I reached that point where I was at 12 on the Pitocin, we're about a good 18, 19 hours in labor. I gave up. There was nothing that I could do. I was pressing the machine. I was stopping the Pitocin myself. I was not dealing with this. I kept begging for pain medication, begging. My nurse, for some reason, I think she was like a holistic nurse or something. She kept telling me, we can get through this. Come on, this is the best way, it's the natural way. And I kept looking at her like she was really stupid. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is my first child. I'm in labor. This is the worst thing I've ever felt. So at this point, it's 9:45 at night, and I'm still stopping the machine. I'm begging. I'm calling the anesthesiologist. The first anesthesiologist that was on during that time, he kept telling me no. He kept brushing me off. He kept telling me, no, we're not going to give you anything else. This is the most that we can do for somebody like you. But I knew that was a lie because I knew that there was more that they could do. I had an appointment. I spoke to the anesthesiologist, and she is not only just the anesthesiologist, she was the head of the department, so she knew what she was saying. So I kept telling them, no, there's more you can do. There's something else you can do. And my nurse was like, no, you have to deal with this. You don't need this pain medication. And then finally, because there was a shift and change, somebody came in and said to this nurse and to this doctor, you guys don't understand. She has a blood disorder. Her pain is 10 times more than what you would feel if you were giving birth right now. Once he said that, I felt a sense of relief because somebody understood. At that shift change, they all huddled in front of my door and they were talking about me and my plan. But at this time, I'm still stopping the Pitocin because I'm in so much pain and I'm screaming and crying. I'm at my knees at this point. There's nothing that could help me. I decided to give up and I said, take this baby out of me. I don't care how you do it. I can't do this anymore. Take her out of me. We're going to the OR. Take her out. And they all came in a huge circle and they said, Nicole, are you sure? Nicole, are you sure you understand what conversations we've had, the risks? And I said, I don't care. Yes, I don't care. Take her out. So they all stepped out, had another meeting, came back and said, Nicole, if we're going to do this, we have to do it now. We have to do it fast. You have to do your infusion. We have to give you a blood transfusion and we have to rush you in within 20 minutes. And I said, okay, we can do that. So because I was still contracting, but the Pitocin wasn't going in, I was able to do my infusions. I did them all myself because they have no knowledge of this particular medication. So I did them all myself. So I started to infuse my factor, did it relatively quickly. Then while I was at the end of my infusion, they brought in the blood. We did the blood transfusion. And as the blood transfusion is going in, I'm getting rushed to the OR. So I'm on the table. The blood is still going in. There's about 50 doctors in that room. And only one was doing the surgery, from what I can see and what I heard. And he was suited up. And the first thing he told everybody before I went to sleep is, I'm the only one touching this patient. Everyone suit up. If there's a cold, we should all be ready. And when I say something, we all should be ready at the same time. So I went straight to sleep, woke back up, and I had a baby. The incision was very, very, very small. They took their time. They told my fiance they did the best that they can do in regards to keeping me safe, and they did. However, once I woke up, I realized that I could not breathe normal. There was something wrong with my breathing, and I do have asthma, but I knew that it wasn't my asthma. And I was in recovery. I had seen my daughter, but for some reason I couldn't get up from laying down. So they kept scanning my stomach about 4 times. I had asked them, why do you keep scanning my stomach for? And they said, we're looking for a bleed in your stomach. And I said, why? And they didn't tell me. So my nurse came in and I said, what's going on? Because I can't really breathe. Like something's wrong. And she said, yes, you're here because there's a complication. So it wasn't until finally a doctor came in and said, there's something wrong. Your heart rate's in the 200s and your oxygen is low. We're going to put you on oxygen. So I said, okay, because they were still in the process of trying to figure out what was going on. They thought I was bleeding somewhere in my body, but they could not figure out where. I had multiple tests done and they couldn't figure it out until they decided to draw blood. They drew blood. They realized my hemoglobin was extremely low, which was definitely expected, but lower than what they thought. I had a cardiac issue where my heart was not working properly for the past 3 days. And it took them about 2.5 days to figure out what was wrong, but they thought, again, it was bleeding somewhere. So it took them a while to get to the heart. A cardiologist came by, noticed that there was something wrong, saw the reports, sent me in for a CAT scan, realized there was fluid surrounding my heart. And that's when he drained me. About 7 liters of fluid came out. And that's when my heart rate started to go back to normal slowly. It was like in the 200s, then the 100s, and then finally it went down to the 80s. My oxygen took longer to get back to normal because I do have asthma. So by the time I was discharged, I was still pretty low, but it was okay to go home on that. However, the bleeding was controlled the whole time I was there because of the plan that was given by the HTC. I stuck to it. I did not divert in the hematologist of that particular hospital. Whatever they said, I did not divert to them. I completely stayed on my plan, and it definitely stayed well. The day of the discharge, my daughter was safe to go home. She was good to go home if she wanted to that day, but I wasn't. But because of COVID, they did push me out a little bit, but they were a little bit nervous about it. They said that they were going to contact hematology within that hospital and ask if I can go home. I looked at them and I said, absolutely not. That's not the people that you ask to see if I can go home. You call my HCC, you ask them if I can go home. That's not my team. That's not my doctors. I'm not working with them. They went back out, spoke to the hematologist. They came back in and said, okay, they said you can call your HCC. They're going to let you go home. So I was like, okay, good. So I went home. And even while at home with a newborn baby, I still had a plan from my HCC. I still had to infuse. It took 2 weeks to figure it out, though, because the first week I did go home. They had me on an everyday infusion, but the bleeding and my hemoglobin was still so low, and the bleeding was a lot that I had to call back. And all they did was increase it to an extra infusion a day, and it got better. I stopped bleeding at 6 weeks, but everything was well maintained. I never went back to the hospital for a bleeding issue, which is something that they did anticipate. But again, I stuck to the plan. I called the HTC if there was any concerns. I followed up with all the doctors, cardiology, primary hematology, and everything's been good. After all of that, I saw the OB at my 6-week appointment, and he then advised me that I could have another baby if I really wanted to, and that I do not need a hysterectomy at this time unless I chose to. So that's pretty much how the whole labor went. Very eventful, but very safe.
Amazing, Nicole. It's such an inspirational story. And the part that you mentioned to me at the beginning before we started recording about how, I wonder if you could just repeat for our listeners about how actually the process and your, diligence actually improved your uterine lining. Did I understand that correctly? And that's why that's why you can actually potentially have a second child?
Yes. So when I was told 5 years ago that my 2 options were hysterectomy or have a baby, because of the amount of damage to my uterine lining from all the bleeding, that's what the advice was. But after I had sought out additional help, or matter of fact, when I went to the HCC, they helped me rebuild that uterine lining. I started taking vitamins, and I got the proper medication to get the bleeding under control for any bleed. And that's how I was able to do that. I listened to my HCC. We got a bleeding plan protocol. I got the right medicine, and that's what helped rebuild all of that down there.
That's so amazing, and such an important thing, I think, for women to hear who might be in the early stages of your story, still dealing with a lot of questions and inaccuracies, from some of the health professionals, unfortunately, that they're talking to. It's such a, theme through all of your stories, this incredible strength that you have in sticking to what you know to be right once you've gotten the right answers, often from your HTC and other trusted, people. How do you find the strength to stand up to, these authoritative people who come in and try to change your plan? How do you find the strength to stand up to them?
Well, honestly, I had to build that strength. And I'm going to be very honest with you. That strength came from being knocked down several times. What I've always said is that you are the only person that is seeing this bleed. Not the doctors, not the care team, obviously unless you're in the hospital, but you're going through this. So when all the times I was told no, I decided to fight back, because I'm the one that's at work where my life is being impacted. My job is at risk. I'm the one in the bathroom hiding because I'm bleeding, changing my clothes, driving while I'm bleeding through my clothes into the seats. I'm the one dealing with that. And when I realized that this was all me and not them, that's when I decided to fight, because if it was them, they would do the same thing. And the same way that they protect their license because of what they believe in, I believe that my life could be better if someone would listen to me. And that's what made me stronger.
That's a wonderful sort of note to end on. But by all means, if you have anything else that you'd like to share, like what it's like being a mom, or what it's like having Luna Rose with you, and what you wish for her, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. When I came home, it was new for me, because I've never been a mom. I've taken care of my baby sister alongside my mother for years, but this was something that was mine. And that was something I had to cope with at first. But then, I'm not going to lie, as a bleeding disorder mom, that's where there was challenges for me, because not only am I taking care of my newborn, I was also infusing. Sometimes I was breastfeeding and infusing. So I would say that if you are a bleeding disorder mom or a new mom, those challenges are going to be right there as soon as you go home. And to expect that as well. But don't be afraid, and definitely keep pushing and moving forward, because any sign of you feeling like you can't do it, it's going to reflect to your child. And that's something that I remembered while I was at home dealing with this in the very beginning. I did not want her to see it. Even though she couldn't see, she could feel, she can sense my depression or me being scared. And that's not something I wanted to give off to her as a new mom. I wanted her to know that I was strong enough to take care of her and myself. So it's definitely difficult. It's definitely challenging, but don't give up. Keep moving forward, and definitely keep your head up. And don't let anyone tell you no. If you know something's wrong with you and you know that you can live a better life, definitely find every outlet you can to get those answers until you've reached your point of feeling comfortable with that decision for your life to be better. So definitely love being a new mom. Definitely love being Luna Rose's mom. And I love being a bleeding disorder mom, because this has made me a better person, a better mom. And it's going to put me in a place where I can show Luna, for her future, how to be a very strong, independent woman. And if she's diagnosed with the blood disorder, which we are still waiting for to find out what age she should go in and get tested, I want her to know that her mom did the best she could to stay healthy enough for her to not end up in the hospital like I used to be. So I really just want her to know strength, and that's what I'm trying to promote.
There you have it. I want to give an enormous thank you to Nicole Angeles for being so honest and open with her remarkable journey. Nicole, Luna Rose will most definitely learn how to be a strong, independent woman from her mama. We wish you both a lifetime of health and happiness. This episode of BloodStream Journeys was written by Heather Robb, featuring the real-life story of Nicole Angeles. This episode was produced by Rob Bradford and Greg Holdsman, audio editing by Colby Crow, sound design and post-production support by Joshua Sterling Bragg, distribution and engagement by Avra Friedman, art and promotion by Christina Newhart and Ryan Gielen. BloodStream Journeys is executive produced by Patrick James Lynch and Ryan Gielen. If you want to reflect on your journey to this moment right here, and tell your story, visit us at bloodstreammedia.com/mystory. We have a simple form. Write your story in it. Or tell us a little about yourself and what you want to write about, even if you don't yet know how. And click submit. We'll be in touch, and together we'll get your story told. Bloodstream Journeys would not be possible without the incredible ongoing support of BioMarin. So we say thank you to BioMarin for their vision and generosity and all the ways they empower the bleeding disorders community to learn, heal, and grow through self-expression. Thank you, BioMarin. Other Bloodstream podcasts include the community touchstone, the Bloodstream Podcast. Bloodstream is an entertaining and informative podcast hosted by Natalie and Patrick Lynch and provides a 360-degree look at the bleeding disorders community through news, interviews, and informed opinionating on the topics that matter most. Also, there will be a bunch of new shows and podcasts coming throughout 2020 from BloodStream Media. So be sure to visit www.bloodstreammedia.com for all of the shows produced by us. Or you can search BloodStream Media anywhere podcasts are distributed, downloaded, streamed, or watched. Happy listening.